Okay, as we're waiting for folks to join the webinar, we will put up a poll. Thank you for joining the Improving Waste Program Performance Through Measurement webinar. I'm Rob Watson. I'm founder and president of SWEEP. With me is Josh Reed from Emerge Knowledge, which is the parent company of Retract Connect. And let's see here, launching the webinar, launching the polls. Okay, there's that. And okay, so please answer the poll while we're waiting, and we will start the program in a few minutes. So Josh is CEO of Retrack, which is a company that specializes in material reporting tools for local governments and waste management organizations. For 20 years, Retrack has been the leading company gathering and analyzing national, state, and local government programs. And they were the impetus behind the Municipal Measurement Program, which is a partnership with US EPA and the Recycling Partnership. And so it's, kind of Emerge Knowledge's belief that and which is fully aligned with that of SWEEP, that, not only can you not manage what you don't measure, but you can't measure what you haven't defined. So having clear, consistent definitions of program elements and then simple and targeted data collection is one of the key factors in program success. My background was in the 90s. I was the founder of the LEED Green Building Rating System. And about 10 years ago, when I became interested in the waste sector, it seemed like there would be a good opportunity for a LEED-like standard for waste. So we've been working with industry experts to craft a program around sustainable materials management, defining it, creating a framework. We are in the pilot phase, which was disrupted significantly by COVID, but now we are getting back on track, and I will share with you later some of the updates that have happened in, as a result of the pilot and sort of the new standard that we will be going forward. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Josh take over with his presentation. And looking forward to your comments and questions later on. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can put things in the chat as well. But we will make sure that we address all of your comments and questions during the presentation. I'm going to leave the poll open a little bit and put it up in a corner. Hopefully that will not disrupt Josh's screen. If it does, I will close it, but hopefully we can get everybody answering the poll questions before the end of the session. So Josh, take it away.
Thank you, Rob. Make sure that my screen is being shared right now. And can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
So if you hit share, oh, actually, okay, maybe now. Okay, it was in my control panel. I believe we are. Uh, okay, there you go. Okay, we're good.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rob and Natasha, for setting this up and inviting me to speak today. We just want to welcome everyone. My name is Josh Reed. Been with Retrack for 12 years now, and in that time, I've held roles in marketing, in product development, and customer success, and even tech support. I've spoken to hundreds of organizations about their data challenges and worked closely with my team to create a suite of reporting solutions that simplify data collection and analysis for all levels of government. I worked closely with the Recycling Partnership to advance the Municipal Measurement Program, that is also known as the MMP, and you might hear me talk about that a few times today. And that was designed to standardize local government program data and to facilitate performance benchmarking across the country. And Chester is the little dog peering over my shoulders you see there. Spent a lot of time outdoors, and
Yeah,
I have a passion for pugilism.
Josh, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not sure that your screen is being shared.
Okay.
Uh,
I will stop and I will try sharing again.
yeah, there you go. Okay, so apparently your screen can be seen. All right, go for it again. Sorry about that.
No
Uh,
problem.
all right, good. Okay.
All right. So I'll move on. You had the chance to see the cute little dog on my shoulder. And now I just want to take a moment to establish why measurement is so important. So the first thing is data is important towards strategy. It provides the foundation for informed decision making and strategy development. Program managers and policymakers and investors all rely on data to make informed decisions, to reduce waste and increase recovery. Program managers rely on accurate measurement to identify opportunities to adapt and expand services, target new materials for recovery, and develop strategies to increase overall diversion in their communities. This is especially true of communities pursuing zero waste goals or those that are tracking progress towards a statewide recycling rate. Policymakers and investors rely on data to better understand where investments will make the biggest impact and direct resources to where they're needed most. Second part is accountability. So strong data systems promote accountability and transparency, ensuring that everyone is doing their part to reduce waste and share responsibility of managing it effectively. To emphasize this point, the Recycling Partnership's most recent State of Recycling report states that 76% of recyclables are lost at the household level, and that is quite a statistic. The metric should signal to municipal program managers that recycling and education outreach is desperately needed to ensure valuable recyclables aren't sent to the landfills. We can't recycle things if they don't enter the stream in the first place. And the third big one is impact. So new products, packaging, and materials are entering the waste streams every day. So program managers need to monitor their programs and adapt their strategies as required. Big or small, the results of our collective effort to achieve true circularity will have more of an impact when it's paired with high quality and verifiable data. When the public sees evidence that recycling programs are effective and that their efforts are making a difference, they're more likely to participate, thereby creating a positive reinforcement loop. Just to drive this point home about the power of data, I wanted to highlight the 50 States of Recycling report. It's a very large report. I'm sure most of the attendees here have seen this, but it is truly an example that demonstrates how powerful data can be when it's assembled, standardized, and aggregated. So there are 50 states of recycling report collected and aggregated and analyzed data from dozens of sources, including state governments and consultants, and they use this to produce a state-by-state assessment of recycling rates for containers and packaging. Producing a report of this magnitude really must have taken quite an enormous effort to pour over all the data they collected, and then they would have had to make decisions to transform the data so that it was normalized and standardized across all the variety that you'll find from one jurisdiction to another. And when they were done with that, they would have had to document the key insights that could be pulled from that, about the strengths and weaknesses of each state's programs, their policies and data practices, and then finally to create a beautifully designed report that is easily understood by the intended audience. What's more, the report really states how reliable and verifiable data is critical to making effective policy and programming decisions. And they concluded that states that have more comprehensive and current data, along with state-managed reporting systems, achieve a higher recycling rate. So hardly have to tell anyone here that the power of data, it's critical to knowing what's going on in the system. Okay, so data is really important. So what does that have to do with what barriers are there to giving everyone access to good data? Let's take a look at a few of the common reasons why local governments don't have access to quality data. The first one is inexperience. It can be a big barrier to getting started because there's an ocean of data points and metrics to choose from when you're getting started. So where should one begin? Communities that have introduced new collection programs may feel overwhelmed by the task of designing a data collection system to measure their program's performance. My advice has always been to start small. We've learned this ourselves through experience. It's best to start small, and if it's your first program, the best place to start is just by asking yourself, what are the essentials? Figure out what questions you're trying to answer with the data that you're collecting, and use your first year to establish a baseline and use that pilot year to discover what's working, what isn't, and refine as you go. If you go too big, too fast, what you'll find is sometimes you've over-engineered the data collection program and you won't get the results that you need. You need to focus on the essentials first and slowly expand as you gain more experience. So consult with peers, research similar programs, and reach out to industry experts. They often have a wealth of knowledge to share. It makes me think of someone that I met recently at the Resource Recycling Conference. It was a county recycling coordinator. She had come up to our exhibit booth and just mentioned how she was retiring and had decades of experience that she wanted to share with people, but she couldn't find anyone who wanted to listen. I just thought it was so important, someone who's had that much experience in the field and having that institutional knowledge lost. It's so important to pass that along. The second one, resources. This is very, very common. It's a barrier to measurement because a lot of local governments are limited by budget. They don't have enough staff, and they don't feel like they have the resources to even consider designing, piloting, and launching a new data collection program. And local governments are very often understaffed. They operate with these limited budgets. So in the beginning, a lot of recycling coordinators will use spreadsheets to track data and analyze the results. We often sort of pick on spreadsheets at Retrack. We talk about replacing your spreadsheets with our software because we know it will streamline reporting and reduce errors and simplify data management. We know that automation can reduce the number of staff needed to effectively run a collection program. But when there isn't budget for software, sometimes spreadsheets do have their place. Another way to secure more budget is to find available grants. If there are any in your region, we know the EPA Swiffer grants there's one more round coming up, and hopefully that will continue into next year, but time will tell. And then there is also often states that are offering grants. So take a look around, see if there are any opportunities for you to apply for a grant that might help fund your first data collection program. The next one is another major challenge is often program managers have a difficult time getting the participation rates they need to have comprehensive data sets. So this is especially true when target reporting entities aren't mandated to report. So in the absence of mandatory reporting, program managers are encouraged to explore incentives and strategies to employ competition between those reporters. We have seen increased participation rates when reporting has been tied to grants. That was definitely true of the MMP. We also ran a program, an incentive called Plant a Tree with the MMP. And what we did was we partnered with One Tree Planted, and we planted a tree for every completed for every community that completed their 3 surveys. And so it did have a measurable impact on the participation as we closed in the end of the reporting period. And it also resulted in over 1,000 trees being planted. So win-win. And establishing a good relationship with policymakers is probably the best route, as they might be convinced to introduce ordinances that require reporting. Required reporting is the best way to ensure that you get the comprehensive data that you need. A cursory Google search will show you that there are sample mandatory recycling ordinance templates available right now that you could use to start an ordinance and start drafting exactly what that might look like. And another strategy is to work with hauler contracts. So including a mandatory reporting clause in hauler contracts is another way to ensure that you're getting some data. This is best done, of course, when you're first contracting with a new hauler, but it's something to keep in mind also when you're negotiating contracts with your existing service providers. And finally, the big one here, of course, is tools, spreadsheets, emails, paper forms. They had their time, but they're inefficient data collection systems. Human error and versioning issues and inconsistent data formats, and even lost records and emails are all good reasons to avoid the older data collection methods. You can collect data with surveys and emails and paper forms. Do not recommend it, but it does usually take a lot more staff to assemble the data, and the quality of that data is often going to suffer just due to all the fail points that are possible with those types of systems. Purpose-built software, by contrast, can save time and money by centralizing your reporting, structuring the data, and reducing errors, and thereby simplifying your overall data management. Program managers can monitor reporting to ensure all stakeholders holders are participating and follow up with those who haven't reported on time. That keeps you on track for your reporting season. And once the data is collected, it's easily aggregated and summarized into analytical reports. As programs grow, the historical data can then be used to measure trends and progress over time. So there's a benefit there as well. I'll just take a moment to talk a little bit about the power of standardization. I don't want to spend too much time, but I think it's a really important part of the conversation. I'm sure that I'm in good company when I say that we need more standardization in this industry. The lack of uniformity is the lack of uniformity in how states and local governments are all measuring their waste diversion efforts really does reflect the unique tapestry of political boundaries, jurisdictions, and authorities, the state regulations, local ordinances, service models, various funding mechanisms, population density, wealth distribution, and access to recycling, and many, many more. And what we found in our journey with standardization is that there tends to be an exception to every rule to make this even more complicated. So it's definitely a challenging project, but it's really important that we get closer to more standardization so that we can see a bit more consistency in the way that we're measuring, comparing one state to another or one local government to another. We want to be speaking the same language when we're talking about waste reduction and diversion. Nevertheless, a system that uses consistent data formats and harmonized terminology and standardized performance metrics would go a long way to telling the true story of waste reduction. And what we really need is a national data standard and reporting framework that will establish consistent measurement across the entire system. I'm thankful that organizations like SWEEP are working very hard to advance standardization. It's something that we need to continue talking about until it happens. Unfortunately, the EPA's National Recycling Strategy did highlight this. This is one of their 5 objectives. It was listed as standardized measurement and increased data collection. And they observed that, quote, different definitions and measurement practices create challenges to setting goals and tracking progress. Stakeholders across the recycling system agree that more consistent measurement methodologies are needed to measure recycling system performance. I couldn't agree more. So where does ReTrack fit into all of this? Well, I'm very glad you asked. ReTrack offers an integrated suite of reporting programs that lean into our 20 years of experience serving government agencies across the US and Canada. The solutions are a great way to get started quickly using our templated surveys and reports. And alternatively, if you don't want to start with those templates, you can work with our customer success team to adapt the templates or create something brand new from scratch. And popular solutions for our local governments here will be hauler reporting, and I'll talk about this one often because it's very applicable to many communities. We have facility reporting, and that would be a program with templates that help you collect data from landfills, from MRFs, transfer stations, composting facilities, waste energy plants, and more. We have compliance reporting for mandatory recycling ordinances that target businesses, restaurants, and multifamily properties. Or you can also go the route of the C&D recycling ordinance reporting, where you're ensuring that construction demolition projects are all meeting the recycling requirements and or submit a recycling plan at the beginning. And municipal or local government reporting, and this is usually a good fit for counties or regional agencies that want to streamline the data collection from the municipalities in their region. I'll just talk a little bit about hauler reporting, because as I said, this one's one of the more popular solutions because it's very applicable to many communities across the US, and it's a good way to get collection data. So many communities use this to collect data and find useful insights about the collection programs. It includes a permit application template that makes it easy for the program managers to review, approve, and onboard new service providers. The diversion and disposal collection reporting templates can be configured for monthly, quarterly, or annual reporting. The forms capture collection sources like communities, convenience centers, or businesses and collect tonnage information by waste stream or material. The haulers can identify the final destination for materials, whether that's disposal or recovery facilities. And they can track fees and surcharges by hauler for aggregate analysis using analytical reports. Our solution also includes analytical reports to measure diversion rates and cost analyses and tonnage summaries. And you can also work with our customer success team, design your own analytical reports. And the GHG report gives communities insights into how diversion performance and disposal contribute to emissions, that is, metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the report uses the EPA's WARM model to translate some of these metrics into environmental equivalents, like tree seedlings grown for 10 years or passenger vehicles taken off the road. And before I wrap up the presentation, I thought it might be useful to provide an example of how retrack can streamline reporting and drive efficiencies. Metro is the regional government in Oregon representing Portland metropolitan area. And before they knew about retrack, the local governments in the region were collecting data from haulers using paper forms and emails, which were subsequently forwarded over to Metro. The Metro staff would transfer all of the data they had collected through the forms and emails into a Microsoft Access database. They also collected virtually the same data directly from the haulers in the region because they needed this to report to the state, but they needed to organize it by watershed rather than by community. So this is quite inefficient, error prone, lots of duplication of effort, and it required quite a bit of time, they said, to collect it from the haulers in the first place, assemble it, and then finally get it in shape for reporting. And after they implemented Retrack's hauler reporting solution, Metro started collecting data directly from the haulers and achieved 100% participation in their first year. The Metro built volume to weight conversion calculator was added directly to the survey so that the haulers could download it. That was going to help them to standardize the measurement in the region, knowing that there was quite a few haulers that had volume measurements. And the solution eliminated the need for local governments to collect data separately, and Metro can just review and verify the data before approving it to be included in the report to Oregon DEQ. We worked with Metro to configure reports to provide local governments with tonnage summaries by hauler, and a report was also created for them, for Metro, to report to the Oregon DEQ, and the report was basically made so that it fit the reporting requirements of the state, and it was a PDF that they could just use to simplify that reporting, and it really did eliminate a lot of the time they needed to take to assemble that data and transform it into the format they were doing manually in the past. So Metro saved time, lots of effort, and most importantly, they eliminated the duplication of effort that was going on at the two levels of government. And now they have quite a bit of visibility into the program performance, and the program has been running smoothly for over 10 years now already. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and thanks again to SWEEP, Rob and Natasha for inviting me here today. If anyone wants to connect to discuss data, dogs, or boxing, please find me on LinkedIn. I'll pass it back to Rob and Natasha in a moment, and I just want to show that I've got a QR code there. If you want to schedule a demo of any kind, you can scan that QR code, and it will let you set up an appointment very quickly. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate your experience and in helping bring a little bit of order and consistency to the Tower of Babel that is waste management statistics in the US. I have put the poll back up for the few of you who have not yet answered to put in your 2 cents. And I will now bring up my presentation and get that going. Many of the challenges that Josh mentioned were apparent to me almost within the first month of beginning to look into these questions. Initially, I was trying to figure out what was going on in certain jurisdictions around waste, and found that there was completely inconsistent measurement, inconsistent definitions, things that didn't add up to 100%, things that were over 100%. I mean, the kind of stuff that if this information were submitted to, my undergraduate statistics class would basically result in an F. And so it made me realize pretty quickly that the data in the waste industry is garbage and that it desperately needed fixing. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem, the fact that the last national reporting we had on waste data is from 2018, which is in fact 2016, 2017 data, that's sort of prima facie evidence that there is a major problem. And in the EPA report from 2018, EPA somewhat apologetically said, well, waste disposal went up quite a bit from 2017 because we added food. And so that resulted in a national waste generation rate of approximately 294 million tons. And others who were doing research at the time, notably Biocycle, Waste Business Journal, and then a couple of years later, the Education Research and Environmental Foundation and also Yale University did studies on waste disposal rates. And all of them were finding waste disposal and generation almost 100 million tons more than what EPA was reporting. So both of these things can't be true. Part of the challenge is that EPA had developed in the 70s a top-down model and basically never backed away from that approach. Waste Business Journal, Biocycle, EREF, and Yale all did either full or partial sampling of the industry and what was actually being reported at the facility level, and built up a much, greater waste generation figure. Now, part of the discrepancy can be in definitions. What EPA defines as municipal waste may not reflect all of the tons going to municipal landfills. The immediate question that comes up is, well, why not? Why isn't a material that is disposed of in a municipal landfill not considered municipal waste, right? So this is, to reiterate, Josh's point that it's very important to have consistent consistent definitions. Um, Today, Waste Business Journal estimates that there are, over 450 million tons generated, just municipal waste, not including C&D. And if we took the average annual rate of growth that EPA statistics show, which is about 1.5% per year, and we apply that to the 2018 figure, we would be at around 327 million tons, still well more than 100 million tons off. And, if you've ever tried to solve a big problem with a small solution, you realize that those things are not compatible approaches. So we've talked about some of these differences, and we really, but a lot of the problem is that the data that we're using is really old. San Francisco loves to call itself a leader, and they tout a very, very high diversion rate, and yet their waste characterization is almost 20 years old. They have not seen fit, for whatever reason, to update the city's waste characterization. And so, one sort of wonders how much truck we should give a self-anointed leader when they are operating on data that's over 20 years old. So just as an example of how weird different waste characterization definitions are, I just took three or four random waste characterizations that I collect. Josh is into boxing. I'm into waste characterization study collection, to each their own. But there's some of the basic categories are fairly similar, but then you start getting into a whole bunch of different downstream general categories. And then within the categories, plastic is probably the most egregious in terms of its diversity of sort of definitions. But you can see that it is really, really hard to know what is going on consistently between jurisdictions. So it's really, really hard to compare program performance across jurisdictions, and even to get a sense of what's going on, even on a regional or a state level, because every hauler, every town has its own way of doing things, and everybody is sort of gerrymandering the analysis to fit their program story. And it sort of, I call it the Lake Wobegon effect, where everybody is above average, which of course is statistically impossible. HDR, which is a leading waste consultancy, did some very interesting work on behalf of Montgomery County, Maryland. Montgomery County, Maryland wanted to see how they were doing compared to other jurisdictions, but HDR found very quickly some of the same challenges that I've just mentioned. And so what they did was they went through an exercise of trying to normalize and making the basis of programmatic scope comparable across various jurisdictions. And what's very clear from this analysis is that King County, Washington, which is the home of Seattle, not only does the best in terms of its reported diversion, but it also is very accurate in the types of materials that they characterize and how those things are tracked. So I would say that King County is probably a model for good data collection and program design and performance. The challenge with Seattle is that it's fantastically expensive to run a program like that, which is, again, another challenge. But good on them for doing it. Minneapolis, on the other hand, they're kind of undercounting their performance, and that if they they were a little more generous with themselves, they would find themselves having a significantly higher diversion rate. But San Francisco is exactly the opposite. They are just basically counting all of the dirt that they're moving around in both the denominator and the numerator, and it makes them look like they have a really impressive recycling rate. And don't get me wrong, 47% is absolutely leading across the country, and would be clearly a leadership performance. However, it's not 80%, right? And by reporting 80%, and a lot of California jurisdictions report 80%, which is kind of 70, 80% for their performance. But if you look at the Cal Recycle numbers, they're in the 30s to 40s, right? And given that SB 986, 1383, other state legislative requirements have diversion rates in the 50 to 75% range. Even nation leading California is way behind the targets. And then Toronto, slightly exaggerated, but not too bad. So this is, again, one of the challenges that we have in terms of trying to figure out what works, right? Because if you have a program that you say does 80%, but it does less than 50, is that the kind of program we want to emulate? Or do we want to look at something that gets 60%, which is a real 60%, and then can we figure out how to do it more cost effectively? Another one of my very, very favorite examples was a published zero waste report from a East Coast city that shall remain unnamed. Found that there were just massive, massive inconsistencies in this report, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if we look at the waste characterization that was provided for the 2.2 million tons generated, metal was reported at 3% of that, which is 66,000 tons. And then if you go back to the appendices where they have the detailed recycling quantities, you find that the white goods and the ferrous, non-ferrous, mixed metals, etc., equal almost 600,000 tons, right? Like literally an order of magnitude more than what was stated in the waste characterization, right? So within the same zero waste report, you have a really, really key material that is reported in an order of magnitude off. You have to wonder, how the heck can you manage a program when you have absolutely no idea what's going on, or at least different people in the system have no idea what's going on everywhere else? And this was interesting because what we found with sweep, which is it's broken up into categories. We've got sustainable materials management policy. We've got waste generation and prevention, which is about data and source reduction. We've got then the sort of the instrumentalities of the waste management program. We've got collection, we've got recovery, we've got disposal. And what we found was, in order to provide collection related data, we need an enumerator and a denominator. And in theory, those, at least the denominator, in other words, the total amount of tons that were handled by the jurisdiction should have been the same. But when, like the collection guys did the data and the disposal guys did the data, we came up with different totals. And that was something that was really, really hard, not only for us, but it was also really hard for the jurisdiction to reconcile. And it kind of goes to what, Josh was saying, is that, people had slightly different categorizations within their, operational silo, or they were, working off of old data and they didn't have updated data. So, we were finding inconsistencies, sometimes that were off by 5 or 10%, not just a few tons, that were really making it hard to understand what was really going on. And, when you've got a situation where you're trying to say, all right, show diversion of X%, well, if you can't agree on what the numerator and the denominator are between your internal things, how are we supposed to figure out what that is, right? And so this goes at sort of the challenge of what the sort of the terrible state of data collection in the industry. The other, when we were first figuring out what to do with sweep, we were like, is the ton, does that tell us anything? And if you actually look at it, it has maybe a little bit of logistical help, but a ton of plastic bottles has a very, very different volume than a ton of almost anything else, right? So it doesn't really help you with logistics, right? Because if you said I've got 10 tons of something, and it's plastic bottles, you're going to need at least 2 trucks. But if it's a ton of grass or metal or whatever, you're going to need half a truck, right? Not that you're going to be able to put more than 10 tons in it, but again, logistically, the ton doesn't really give you anything. Neither does it really give you much in airspace for exactly the same reason. The volume of a ton varies widely across materials. The economic value of a ton varies widely across materials. The environmental impact of a ton varies widely across materials. So the ton literally tells you nothing about anything, but it's used because it's easy to track. And just because something is easy to track doesn't mean it's useful, but it's kind of why we're here, because we're tracking a number that doesn't mean anything. And so we're trying to figure out what do you do instead? So the initial thought is that looking at sort of more on an environmental side, looking at the carbon potential or the energy equivalency, or more sophisticated, using a waste-based tool like MEBCalc, or doing a life cycle assessment, can give you a better sense of how to target your program on things that actually matter, right? If you're just doing dumb tons, you can collect a lot of tons that are not very valuable environmentally and leave, a half a ton aside that could be 10 times the value of the 10 tons that you collected, right? So we're trying to figure out what, if not the ton, then what, and then how do we get a system in there to begin to figure out what that means from a from a program operation and performance assessment period, from a program assessment perspective. And clearly developing a uniform system of classification for characterization and composition is key. And then a consistent methodology for diversion. What constitutes diversion, what constitutes disposal, right? So, some things are fairly clear. Other things are less so, right? Is pyrolysis, is it incineration? Is it a form of diversion because you're creating things with valuable content? Is incineration diversion because you're creating energy? These are all questions that need to be figured out. Because while you could argue that incineration is just a landfill with a match. There is a difference between um, extracting energy, biochar, and other things from an organic thing, and using those materials effectively again, as opposed to either putting it in a hole where it's going to generate methane, or incinerating it where, because it's mixed with other things, you're not really doing anything useful. So I think, these are the kinds of conversations we need to start having as our waste disposal is growing, as landfills are becoming less available, harder to site and permit, distances are growing, external markets for recovered materials are decreasing, and we've seen diversion rates drop by almost 10 points in the last 10 years, because I think people don't have a lot of faith in the system. And as Josh pointed out, the positive effects that I'm going to make this effort to do something and it's going to produce a difference, as opposed to I just did all this work and I followed a dump truck to the landfill and it took my recycling and dumped it in the landfill. Why am I wasting my time and energy? That can produce the same kind of bandwidth effect, but in the opposite direction. So you've got three key constituencies in the waste management field. You've got your consumers, which right now are the backbone of the recovery system, whether they're businesses or individuals. You've got the waste industry, which is managing what consumers or their customers, decide what to put in what bin. And then you've got manufacturers that are looking for the feedstocks that come out of this partnership between the waste industry and consumers. And each one of them looks at the characteristics in a different way. So how can we find something that is useful for all parties, but sufficiently simple to capture the value of setting something aside in a certain way so that it can be repurposed as opposed to disposed of? And that's one of the things, that's that sort of tripod that we're trying to balance there. Peter Drucker famously said, you can't manage what you don't measure. And our corollary to that is that you can't measure what you haven't defined. So we've started with some initial definitions for things. That's all in the standard. And you can download the standard from www.sweepstandard.org, and we invite you to do that. I will note that the standard that's up there is the pilot standard. It's not the newly updated version, and I'll be spending a few minutes talking about some of the changes we've made. But just a very quick primer on what SWEEP is and what isn't. Some folks say, well, how do you guys differ from TRUE? And the short answer there is that TRUE covers what facilities do. It takes care of everything up to the curbside. And then once something leaves the curbside, SWEEP takes over and figures out, and then it's a little bit more upstream in terms of policy data, et cetera, but then gets into the collection, recovery, and disposal of the material. We have 5 categories ranging from sustainable materials management policy to waste generation and prevention, solid waste collection, post-collection recovery, and post-collection disposal. And then we have a bonus category for innovation, which is either exemplary performance or things that we haven't thought of. So altogether, the credits within these categories add up to 100, and you get the 10 bonus points. And then depending upon how many of those points you get, in addition to the prerequisites, you get your SWEEP certification. So just looking at the importance of data in SWEEP, we have 12 points, 12% of certification, or almost a quarter of the way to the lowest level of certification, all around key elements of measuring and reporting data, ranging from waste characterization and waste generation to how your source reduction and waste prevention are doing. And then also we have a fair amount of points around transparency over costs because I would imagine that most people in the community do not know that collection is two-thirds of the cost of managing waste, and that it costs probably 50% more to collect recyclables than it does uh, regular garbage simply because of the difference in the density of the conventional recyclables compared to the much wetter regular trash. So those are the kinds of things that if consumers and policymakers understood them, they could then begin generating programs that not only were more effective, but also more cost effective. So, in order to help people navigate the certification process, we have a certification manual, which is linked to our online Retrack Connect forms. The Retrack Connect forms are mostly radio buttons and then requiring some uploading of materials to demonstrate that you've done certain things that you said that you've done. And then in a few places, you need to put in actual numbers. And then those numbers need to be supported by data that you upload. And so having the numbers agree between the different sections was, like I said, one of the big challenges we had in going through the certification process in the pilot. And we're trying to figure out, even if things were off by a few tons, the machines wouldn't let you go forward because the numbers didn't add up. And so we're trying to figure out if we can, say, look, if they're within 2% between silos, we'll give it a pass and we'll do an average, and that's the number that we'll use. So we're trying to figure out how we can accommodate some of the uncertainty in the present system while having enough certainty and consistency so that it's not, we're not dealing with wildly different figures when we're trying to evaluate performance. So we've done a lot of updating since the pilot, since the first phase of the pilot is ended. We've simplified and consolidated each of the standards. We've also done some significant streamlining because we originally had local government, waste management, industry, and campuses all in the same standard and slightly different requirements for each. That made the document fairly big, and it made you have to figure out and parse and look for the right color. And so we've changed all that since we're not going to end up printing these things, which is why we kind of wanted to save paper. And now that we're going to go electronic, we don't need to do that. We're going to create separate document for that. We also simplified and streamlined the reciprocity. I'm not going to go into that right now. And we also expanded the innovation section with a lot of the credits that we found weren't ready for prime time in the standard in the regular section. We moved a lot of them to the innovation section. And our original theory of change was that local governments were going to be responsible for everything. And that was just, all that did was make local governments mad because the haulers and the service providers had way more power and control than we imagined. And the contracting function was significantly less, had significantly less leverage than we imagined. So by simplifying and consolidating, we're changing a little bit of the point totals, fewer credits worth more point. And so, we're in the process of just making sure that the point allocations are proper. And then what we found were things on the West Coast, which have a very long regulatory history of telling people what to do. Those guys were doing really, really well, but other parts of the country which did not have that, those decades of being pushed in a certain direction, there's a pretty big cliff between the 10-15% on the West Coast and the top quartile of the market that we were trying to address in the rest of the country. So we broadened the applicability of Sweep Plus, which is supposed to be for the top quartile, by lowering the performance thresholds, trying to streamline the documentation requirements and make it less busy. And also, rather than having to update certification every year, we moved it to 3 years because local governments are still reeling from COVID budget issues and just felt like they didn't have enough budget to keep doing it every year. We will probably have some sort of attestation of minimum changes just to ensure that certification it continues to be valid, and we've also streamlined the recertification fees. So we would love to get you involved as members of SWEEP. You can join our committees and help us craft the future of sustainable materials management in the US. And I'd love to see some of you all in our pilot program when we reissue it in early 2025. So if you want to get involved, please contact us through info@sweepstandard.org. Visit our website, sweepstandard.org. We've got a lot of material on there, some good articles, some good data, and very much look forward to working with you again for a sustainable future. So really appreciate your time with us, and would love to take any questions. We will be posting a recording of this session on our YouTube channel, and you will get a link of the presentation in a follow-up email in a few weeks. And so, excuse me. So are there any other questions either in the Q&A or in the chat? Josh, did you have any things to follow up with?
No, I just wanted to thank you again for inviting me to speak today. If anyone wants to learn more about ReTrack, I'm available. And as I said, I'm happy to talk about boxing too. Any of those are good with me.
We will also share the results of the poll. I do not see any new questions from folks. So once again, thank you so much for joining us on this pre-Thanksgiving webinar, and hope you found it useful, and hope everybody has a wonderful and fulfilling and thankful Thanksgiving. So we'll see you all. Our next webinar will be next year, and that will be the January webinar will be announced sometime in the upcoming weeks. So see you next time, and thanks for all you do for the world.